Hello and welcome to the Career Compass, Series 2, Episode 4. It's my great pleasure to be joined today by Carl Eidsgard, an AI explorer who originally hails from Oslo, Norway, and is now located in Amsterdam. Carl started his career with HTC before honing his craft at both Oracle and Microsoft, before launching his own company, FenixMinds, in September 2023. Carl, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on to speak with me today.
Hi, Aaron. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for making the time. And it's literally just gone past Easter here in Europe, and you were just back home with the folks, I believe. How did you get on?
I was. So, I've been living in Amsterdam now for 7 years. And during the pandemic, obviously, I didn't make it back for Easter. So it was sort of nice getting that Norwegian Easter experience again for the first time in a long time. So I had a really great time in Norway.
Fantastic. It's a beautiful country. And I guess you're probably just escaping the winter now, getting towards the spring.
You wouldn't think it. So right now in Amsterdam, it's raining cats and dogs. And that's usually how it is here. You know, you can experience 4 seasons in a day if you're lucky. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the summer. That's what I'm really looking forward to here.
Absolutely. The Vondelpark is a particularly nice place to spend time when the sun's shining, and
absolutely.
You have all the art galleries and all the
For
canals.
sure.
Yeah, it's a
And
beautiful
finding
place.
a terrace, have a beer, just
Oh,
taking the view, you soak up the sun. You
there's a
name
lot
it.
worse places to be.
Absolutely.
Put it like that. So from a business perspective, we've just ended Q2. Signs of green shoots, if you like, in terms of VC starting to lend again, interest rates hopefully coming down. How are you seeing 2024 so far? Is it shaping up well?
So from a technological perspective and AI technology more specifically, 2024 is shaping up to be an absolute pivotal year. Sort of within the AI community, there was a lot of talk at the end of 2023 that, 2023 is going to be the last normal, quote unquote, year. And it's really shaping up to be that way. So when I look at what's happening in the technological space, it is an explosion. Right, exponential growth and really an explosion in terms of capabilities and how different AI labs, how different companies are utilizing AI. It's just really exciting to see. It's a really exciting time to be alive, to see this transformation of a society up close.
Yeah, from my perspective, you can't pick up a newspaper, browse the web, or even catch up on the latest headlines without hearing something about AI, right? It's a field which you very kindly gave a presentation on for us in a recent Jurupa webinar. Thank you again for that.
Yeah.
Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about your early years and what got you into technology, how you landed in your current guise as a kind of AI pioneer, if you will?
Sure. So the big sort of schism or the big divergence for me happened well over a decade ago at this point. So I wasn't originally supposed to be here, and I wasn't originally supposed to be doing AI. When I was sort of in my late teens, I was handling a career in finance, so I started business school back then. I want to say that this was 2010, the end of 2010, fall 2010. And then in 2011, I read this book called The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil, who is one of the, I want to say, original mad lads in sort of futurism. He's been talking about longevity and immortality and stuff like that for as long as I've been alive. But anyway, this book it gave me a light bulb moment. It took a little bit of time for everything to sink in, but once I realized the true potential of artificial intelligence to just reshape our entire society and what it means to be a human, that's when I realized I'm not going to be doing economics anymore. This is not for me. I'm going to go all in on tech. And it took me a while to get into sort of the right role to shape that career trajectory. I started out in mobile devices for Samsung and HTC, as you pointed out. But around 2017 is when everything changed. I got a call from a recruiter for Oracle here in Amsterdam, and I jumped on it. immediately. And since then, I've been working in sort of data analytics and AI, sort of getting a more holistic understanding of enterprise deployments and enterprise technology to couple with the already pre-existing knowledge of AI, right? And now that we're here in the AI era, I figured, well, my contribution is probably best done outside of big tech. Really try and help people and businesses come to grips and come to terms with AI, and also helping them figure out how to use AI. Because I really do believe that this is a pivotal moment for not just business and the economic system as a whole, but for humanity, for us as a species.
We're at a hugely exciting juncture, aren't we? I remember having a podcast interview with one of my guests last summer, back in July, I think, and this was a chief product officer, hugely experienced in terms of building things from scratch. Began his career in consultancy, and he was kind of very well positioned looking at this. And he talked a lot about generative AI, particularly if we think of the use cases, in recruitment, for example. Let's start at home, right? We're having so many conversations with senior executives about what are the potential impacts. Where do we start? What would be the best way forward here, given there are various kind of concerns about the pace of evolution and the changes. So if we think specifically about the recruitment industry, could you tell us a little bit more about what generative AI is, how it differs from other AI technologies that are used in kind of hiring processes?
Yeah, so the short answer is, well, it's not really a short answer, but so there doesn't really exist a short answer to this, because this is very much a part of a larger evolution that's been going on for some time. But in the last 20 years, we've sort of gone through three distinct paradigms. The first would be traditional machine learning or algorithms. And the second is deep learning. So when you figure out how to stack these algorithms on top of each other in an artificial neural network to do vastly more complicated tasks. And then you've got generative AI, which is just taking a whole bunch of information about the world and compressing that into an artificial neural network. And sort of in recruitment and HR more broadly, the deep learning systems, right? So the second paradigm has been used for some time. And that's sort of how you logistically solve the challenge of, you have thousands of applicants or you have hundreds of applicants, right? How do you actually logistically sift through that vast stack of resumes and cover letters, right? And that's what really deep learning systems have been helping HR departments and recruiters do for the better part of the decade. It's just that, right? But this is very much a pattern-based sort of exercise for these systems. So it will be looking for certain terms, certain words within a CV or a cover letter. You might be looking at where you're located, and then this is all matched against a profile that the company thinks would be a good fit for this position. But the key crucial thing that's sort of lacking from that process is context, right? So even though a candidate is very good on paper, you don't really know a whole lot about that candidate until you sit down and actually have a chat with them. And that's sort of the component that generative AI has the potential to solve through a whole host of different mechanisms, is that you can expand that initial picture a lot more than just a resume or a cover letter.
Is that additional what's behind the mask? What makes that person tick? What gets the blood pumping? What would make them a positive match for the company culture or the ethos? What's on the roadmap? Have they got the right behavioral and functional competencies to represent a great hire?
Exactly.
And I can recall going back to 2008, which seems like a long time ago now, actually. And there was a product called Daxtra, which was kind of really beating the drum about CV parsing. And I remember the software demo, and the sales guy was saying, "Hey, look at this. Just give me any resume you like. We're going to feed that through the system. Our advanced kind of computing system will pick out the details. It'll put them in the right merge fields, blah, blah, blah." And everyone around the room said, "Wow, this is groundbreaking. This is the next big thing," right? And of course that was back then. And we've talked about the kind of fast evolution. I think one of the one of the kind of key topics that we addressed in our recent webinar, which you so kindly presented in, was what is the best starting point with all of this stuff, in layman's terms. So let's just say, I'm a chief people officer. My company is interested in integrating generative AI into our hiring process, but we're not really sure where to begin. What foundational steps, Carl, would you recommend to ensure they're prepared to adopt the technology effectively?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I would say that it boils down to a single word, and that is the strategic aspect of it, right? And strategy is extremely important here, because if you just start adopting all kinds of different solutions, then you're not doing it in a way where you have necessarily the correct structure to capitalize on the full potential of generative AI. So I would say that strategy is where it all begins, crafting a good AI-centric strategy. But there are some subcomponents to strategy, and the first sort of subcomponent would be education, right? If you have no idea what these systems are capable of doing, then in order to craft a good strategy around it, you would need to get some education and get some sense of what the possibilities are. Once you have that, hopefully, if the education is done well, then you also realize that you can retool and reassess goals and just the overall priorities for the company or for the organization. And then based off that, that's when you start crafting sort of the strategy or the document that outlines how you're going to do this. And then once you've done that, then you can move on to execution and start, talking about all the different technologies, all the different models that are out there. But very much start with a good and comprehensive strategy.
It's quite easy to drown in the maelstrom of tools that are flying out every day. There's new innovation, by the minute, effectively, in this field. So rather than kind of being kind of blinded by science, it's almost, as you say, better to start with the end goal in mind. What are you trying to get to? Even starting small, maybe saying, this is a process that's quite inefficient. The candidate journey isn't very positive. They find it frustrating. Can we make life easier for everyone? Can we get to a better experience? How do we supercharge? How do we automate? So, which kind of leads me to my next point, which is about tailoring those solutions. So can you think of any relevant use cases where a company might tailor the hiring process using generative AI? Are there any customizable elements that allow for more adaptation to different types or sizes of company?
So I just want to come out and say one of the big value statements in sort of AI or generative AI as it stands is that you can customize this at a whole different level than you can do with any other type of software in the past. Right now, you have two types of models, two types of technologies out there on the AI front. The first is closed source technologies, typically ChatGPT or Google Gemini would be closed source. But there is also this really incredible development happening on the open source side. And the difference between the two is that when you deploy a closed source model for any kind of use case, then you are at the mercy of whatever AI lab owns that model, right? They take care of all of the data processing, training the models. You can to a certain degree fine tune what you want the model to do yourself, but the inner workings of closed source models is very, very difficult to get a sense of. Like, there is no one that has an architectural blueprint outside of OpenAI for how ChatGPT works. This is not the case with open source, where everything is documented and you have a very good sense of how sort of the model works. And additional to that, you also, so with open source, you own the whole model, right? So everything that goes in is your responsibility and you have full control. So I want to say that in the same business, you will probably use a combination of both technologies, but figuring out when to use what technology is going to be very, very key in terms of not just data security and privacy, and we'll probably get into that a little later in the podcast, but in terms of, call it, the flexibility and the opportunities you have right now to just customize something that is purpose built for your organization, that possibility exists already today, so you don't really need to sit around and wait for someone to develop a piece of software that you can use.
Makes sense. And what would you say probably are some of the most common challenges that companies face when they are implementing generative AI into their hiring processes, and how can they be overcome? Is it really all around that open source approach, or?
Uh, I think the open source approach is a key part of it, simply because if you go to a CIO and mention the term open source, you can tell that he or she gets a little nervous about that, and that is mostly due to the fact that sort of open source in the past it means that you build everything from scratch yourself, right? Which means that if something goes wrong with that piece of software, you need to dedicate massive amounts of resources to just solving what's wrong with it. But that's where AI is a little different in the sense that it is self-supporting, right? Once you've installed the large language model, either it works or it doesn't. And if it doesn't work, then it's mostly an infrastructural thing. So you need to open up more computers or more servers to do it. But aside from that, LLMs tend to be largely self-supporting in that sense. So that means that you can build a piece of software around any use case that you want, and the resources that you need to dedicate to keeping everything up and running is far less. In addition to that, you actually have more security in the sense that you own the whole stack yourself. So that means that if there is a data breach of some kind, you control sort of the security around that. You do not do that for call it closed source models. Right? So if there is a 0-day exploit in call it ChatGPT for some sort of security breach, where someone uses retrieval augmented generation or something like that, you have absolutely no control at the end of the day whether the data that you've left there is or is retrieved by someone else. So there is a discussion to be had around that. I'm not saying that they're unsafe to use, these closed source models, because they're not, but there are some things that you need to consider and that you should probably also consider when you start building AI for your own business or for the organization.
That all makes perfect sense, really. Let's talk a little bit about the candidate experience. I think that's kind of an important piece to the jigsaw, because again, out of all the conversations we're having right now with senior HR executives, it's about things like digital AI guardians, to kind of check in on candidates and employees. How are they feeling? Do they have everything they need? Are they being enabled? I think if we're talking about pre-hire, one of the things we have in Jurupa is the candidate charter, which isn't necessarily reinventing the wheel, but it's trying to address that challenge of the last 4 years, which I would say probably started and got worse through COVID and all of the problems we've seen in Europe and worldwide, where candidates have generally made applications, their resumes have gone into black holes, they haven't heard back, been generally quite a dissatisfying and, energy sapping experience, generally being a job hunter. And it continues even to the present day, I would say. So we've tried to put something together whereby anyone that we're representing is guaranteed to hear back in timely fashion, openness, transparency, constructive feedback that hopefully helps them move on or indeed secures them and sets them up for success. So if we think about generative AI in this sense, how can that enhance the candidate experience during the process? Could there be any examples of where AI has been used to date to personalize interactions or to streamline that candidate engagement piece?
I actually saw an example of that in a YouTube video. I think that was yesterday or the day before, where there was a company that just automated the whole thing, right? So the candidate was talking to essentially a robot that had a voice, right? So it was speech to text is what we call that. And they didn't really have a good experience with that, right? Because you do need to separate sort of the material aspects from the logistical aspects, right? So the whole reason why these black holes exist is because there is a logistical issue that needs to be solved in terms of, well, we've gotten X number of applicants for this position, and we're only 2 people working on this particular hiring. we can't possibly give
Mm.
feedback to each and every one of them. Right, so that's a logistical challenge. But then we also have the material challenge, which is, well, if you start with a candidate list of, say, 500 applicants, right, how do you get that down to the or more manageable number, say 10 short list of applicants that would be the best fit for you? And with the tools that currently exist, that's or essentially deep learning. You feed all the
Mm.
500 CVs or 500 resumes into a machine learning solution that just goes through and looks for, okay, this based on what the goal is of this hiring, these 10 would probably fit the best. But with generative AI, you can sort of expand on that a little bit, and you can say, well, instead of conducting interviews with all 500 as people, you can have a middle ground where you say, well, they can chat with a chatbot that is tuned to find certain aspects about their personality or who they are, right? And then use that as an addition to the already pre-existing sort of CV-based term pattern recognition solution, so that the 10 candidates that you end up with are essentially vetted for not just their skill set and how closely that aligns, like their formal competencies, how well that aligns with the priorities
Mm.
of the role, but also a little bit more about who they are. How do they interact with chatbots, or how do they
Mm.
present themselves? Are they good communicators? Do they think about sort of what they're about to say? Little
Mm.
things that all make up a personality.
And I think there are even ways to not necessarily gamify that, but to make it a little bit more fun, a bit more
Mhm.
lighthearted, to kind of take different angles to ask those questions, in terms of what makes them tick, what gets them
Absolutely.
out of bed and revved up, right? So I think the other side to this, as well as the candidate
Mm,
journey, is about mitigating any
mm,
bias that exists. There have been quite a few interesting debates
mm,
over the last few years and concerns
mm,
expressed about bias in AI driven hiring. So in your experience and what you've seen so far, does generative AI address those concerns? And if
mm,
so, what sort of measures does it take to ensure fairness
mm.
and diversity in hiring practices?
So it depends on the model. You can get models out there that are really really bad, and you can also get models out there
Mm.
that is really really good. But if
Mm.
assuming that you go for one of the really good models out there, then generally speaking, as a baseline, they are all very well balanced, right? Because all of these models contain an internal world model that is represented as text. And that world model is actually very balanced. So when Elon Musk wanted to create Grok, he was positioning that as sort of an anti-woke, or anti what's the American term for it? The or liberal, right? Anti-liberal.
Liberal
Yeah.
elites or
Well,
something along
well,
those lines?
anti-liberal, I think was his goal,
Mm.
anti-woke and anti-liberal. But
Mm.
then when this model went online and people actually started using it, it was trained from sort of the same mechanisms that OpenAI used to train ChatGPT with, which meant that it had this underlying role
Mm.
model. So when a user asked him sort of, well, who should I vote for, Donald Trump or Joe Biden? It said Joe Biden because on a policy or from a policy perspective, he seems to have a solid this, that, and the other, right? Whereas Donald Trump does not.
Mm.
Uh, and that was
Mm. Mm.
directly contrary to what it was Elon Musk was trying to do, right? Because he wanted them to, or he wanted to essentially nudge the model in such a way that sort of it would just spit out things that didn't make
Yeah.
sense, or just supported the
Mm.
user. But that is very difficult to do because it turns out that data in the aggregate sort of smooths over those biases. Now that's
Mm. It's almost self-correcting in a sense. It balances
almost
itself
almost
out.
self-correcting. But there is one major caveat to this, which is that when you drop in a company's data, right, so data that it has not previously been trained on, there could be biases within that data set, right? So if you've inadvertently been hiring a certain type of profile for the last 20 years, say white men in their 40s, right? No offense to you, but white men in their 40s, right?
Thank you.
You're not really aware that you've been doing it, but that's just how the chips landed. Well, then probably that's going to affect the model's performance in terms of new hires. So you need a mechanism to smoothen or flatten out the data set in such a way that it is a little more inclusive. Now, luckily, there exists ways of doing that, but you really need to be aware that this is an issue, right? That this is something that could arise. So there are ways of getting around that by just extending the data set through synthetic data, but uh, definitely a risk worth considering when you start using these models.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Going back to something you said earlier, interesting enough, was I think with the increased use of AI in recruitment, data privacy and security have obviously become paramount. How does generative AI ensure the protection of candidate data throughout the hiring
So
process?
that is actually largely a technical. So it depends on how you design the specific solution that is doing or performing the actual task. If you've used closed source models and it's all built on that, then all the data ends up with OpenAI, and they say that they're
Yeah.
not training on it, which I believe them on, to be fair, but that still means that you've shared your data somewhere else, depending on the mechanism. So there are some ways around that to concepts like federated data, where it's like a game of memory, right? So the machine just reads the data, but it doesn't actually store it anywhere. But that's a deeply sort
Yeah.
of technical aspect to this. But as a general whole, what is worth keeping in mind is that right now there are no fit for purpose AI legislations out there. There's no country that has passed any comprehensive legislation regulating generative AI. The EU has sort of, they've tried, but you can tell that that is not really up to date with the current paradigm that we're in. Which means that you need to take sort of data privacy is largely up to you, right? So the audience, right? It's up to the organizations that adopt this. Which means that you need to design some principles, or you need to incorporate some principles into the design of the solution. And that will be first and foremost pre-existing regulations. So make sure that it is compliant with stuff like GDPR and just data privacy as we've shaped it today. But also you need to determine a confidence level. So I usually say that a good rule of thumb is don't do unto others what you would be uncomfortable others doing unto you, right? So if you feel uncomfortable with a machine taking care of a certain process, then maybe not do that, right?
Yeah. Maybe not hand over the
Yes,
full task for control of in this
exactly.
sense. Yeah.
So, there are little things like that you need to take into account when you're designing these solutions. But data privacy, it is a technical discussion just as much as it is a principle.
I mean, possibly one more for the CIOs
Yes.
and CTOs than it would be for, say, chief people officers, chief of staff, whatever it might be. Yeah. So if we think about the impact that generative AI has on the decision-making process, if it comes to recruiters and hiring managers, I think one of the great hopes for people like ourselves, clinging on by our fingernails probably in the next few years, is that last bastion of the human interaction, the emotional intelligence, the ability to read people and build rapport. Hopefully, it's a while, from our perspective at least, talks on AI can do that, replicate it to a meaningful level. But as it stands right now, from what you can see on the roadmap, can AI make predictions or suggestions that humans might overlook right now? I mean, I guess they can in terms of the efficiency drive of the process.
So again, it is a little bit of that, or it borders on sort of a technical explanation, but the short answer is yes. So machines, because they've got essentially the whole world compressed into an artificial neural network, it can find patterns that would be very difficult for a human to spot. This has been sort of the crux of AI for as long as AI has been a thing in the last 20 years. It's the whole reason why you do AI is just the sheer amount of data would take too long for any human to sift through. So there's definitely that opportunity. But I would also point out that sort of that human element is very important, right? Because we are going to work together for, or we're going to work in the same company, we're going to be a part of the same culture, and we're going to sort of spend a lot of time together, either virtually or in person. So how you craft that, call it hiring process still, or that process still needs a lot of human interaction, and it should be done from an optimal efficiency perspective, so it solves the logistical challenges that we spoke about earlier, but at the same time it also maintains that human touch, right? I would say that's a good hiring process. So
yeah, and there are probably a couple of examples I could think of that might be relevant there. So there is a company out there called
mm,
Causally, we've had some conversations with, and essentially the value proposition is using AI,
mm,
very deep level of AI, to search through
mm,
existing medical knowledge, in really basic terms, look for combinations, look for potential
mm,
cures, treatments, diagnoses. It really is making some incredible breakthroughs. And there's an obvious example of a machine being able to run millions of queries a second or whatever. No human would be,
mm,
capable in a million years of kind of getting to the
mm,
same conclusions that quickly, right? So there's an obvious use from a machine
mm,
versus human perspective. I think another example would be a very interesting product that's being built by a company
mm,
called Juicebox, and they have a product called People
mm,
GPT. So it's effectively my kind of flailing non-technical explanation. It's a wraparound effectively
mm,
of ChatGPT, but designed for headhunters like myself. Great example. Show me all of the
mm,
CFOs in Singapore. Okay, now let's find the people that have more than
mm,
15 years experience. You're gradually narrowing it down. Okay, but asking questions as opposed to using
mm,
strings and Boolean techniques to say which of
mm,
these candidates went to
mm,
Oxford or Cambridge or whatever it might be, really kind
mm,
of digging into the detail. And it's taking that more machine learning based approach,
mm.
I would say, as opposed to just feeding the machine technical queries. It's quite an interesting direction that it's going
Well,
in,
so
I think.
the thing about especially juice box, I guess, so when they build wrappers around ChatGPT, which is a lot of software out there. So there's a lot of software vendors out there who's essentially built an application that they've just wrapped around ChatGPT, and then they package that
Yeah.
as their own software, when in reality it's ChatGPT
Yeah.
doing all the work underneath. Um, First sort of comment
Mm.
to that is, well, you can do it probably better and cheaper yourself. Like if all you need is access to a fine-tuned version of ChatGPT, you can go in, log in via the interface and do that. And there's no issue with that.
Mm.
But the second part of it is that
Mm.
ChatGPT already, like, it's already probably read millions upon millions of resumes, and it already has a fairly good contextual understanding for sort of, well, what sort of profile would fit into what kind of role. And it's just a matter of essentially tuning the artificial. So, and if you consider this, so every time you log on to ChatGPT and you start writing something, essentially what happens is that the back end artificial neural network configures itself to the thing that you're trying to do, which is in some cases why it takes a little bit of time for it to generate that first response, especially if it is call it more complex, is that it's basically just reworking its the artificial neural network, or that's back end
Mm.
from the front end application to essentially solve that task better. So what that means is that if you want a solution where you can use certain call it resumes, or you want to match that towards a certain job description that you have, and you want to do that on a large scale, you can probably build out a solution that can do that yourself with relatively minimal effort.
Mm.
Uh, so not to take I guess sales opportunities away from Juicebox, but thought I would throw that out there.
Well, even the $20 a month
Mm,
I upgraded to pay for ChatGPT version 4, and the ability of as you say, the individual user to train
Mm,
it and refine it and almost build a
mm,
bot version of yourself to think like you would think,
mm,
to write in your style, use your tone of voice.
mm.
Absolutely remarkable stuff, and I think we're just right at the beginning of all of this, or at least in the very early phases, I would say.
Definitely, definitely.
Um, there are quite a few voices out there who are passionate about trying to keep the human
Mm,
element of search and selection. I'm one of them. And I think that the general mantra or optimism is around let's use AI to augment
mm,
what we can do, to enhance it, to make things more efficient, to save time, to enable. We've
mm,
obviously had separate discussions about
mm,
a UBI globally, which is probably a
mm,
discussion for another day. But I think whilst AI can streamline and enhance many aspects of hiring, that human element does remain crucial. So how do you kind of balance the use of generative AI with that need for human intuition and EQ in
Well, so
recruitment?
there is, or I guess that question feeds into a very much larger discussion about humans' relationship with technology, and how is that weight, or that you call it, what's the weight point going to be between the two, right? Where is it that call it that the human touch will be more valuable, and where is it that the machine touch is going to be more
Hmm.
valuable? And I want to say that us humans, we're not designed to live or coexist with AI, right? It's gonna take us a while to get comfortable with coexisting with AI. But at the same time, things are moving very, very quickly, right? So AI is sort of imposing itself in every aspect of our lives, whether we want it or not. So what I often
Hmm.
argue for is that, well, maybe use that opportunity to further enhance that human touch, right? So let the machines take care of everything that has to do with volumetric tasks, stuff that is difficult to solve from a logistical perspective. But so if we were to take the hiring process as an example once again, you can say that, well, getting down to the short list of 10 candidates, right? Machines can probably handle that. But once you have the 10 candidates and you have really good prospects, then you need to make sure that you stay in touch with them and that you communicate properly, right? So
Hmm.
that they don't sit around for a month expecting a response and then that response never comes, right? Make sure that you invest more time into the 10 really good candidates that AI has generated for you. That, and also use AI in such a way that you enable, so humans learn better from other humans. At least most of us do. You do have
Hmm.
the idiot
Yeah.
savants out there that just pick up everything by reading a book. I'm personally not one of those people, and I tend to believe that most people aren't like that. So maybe use some of the efficiency gain in terms of time that you will gain from implementing AI and invest that into your people. Make sure that sort of that social fabric and that social learning aspect of it is enhanced as much as possible. But that's more a question of goals and strategy and stuff like that.
Absolutely, and to throw another kind of interesting point in there, we talked
Mm,
prior to the recording here about the fact that attention
yes,
spans are so
we did.
so minimal these days, whether it's children or adults, and losing that ability
Mm,
to look away from the screen or to flip it downwards, to turn it off, to have a break. It's so important, and there is a certain amount of recognition
mm,
from people that they need to do that for their kind of
yes.
spiritual health, their mental health, call it what you will. Um, and maybe, as you said,
Mm,
using that extra time that you've gained from the more efficient process, why not use that
yes.
time to have a walk in nature, or to
Yes. Or
recharge or perform some
or
yoga,
or
whatever
the
you want to
extra
do,
money
right?
that you make from just or effectivizing processes, maybe use some of that to reinvest into your people. Make sure that make sure that your place
Yeah,
is a place that people actually want to come into and spend time at together with other coworkers. It's just a suggestion, but I
I
think
think so.
for my generation, so I mean, I'm a millennial, right? And for my generation, that sort of sets a workplace apart, is if it's actually a good place to work, if it has social values that align with my values, then that's massively important. my generation, we are the ones that are coming into, organizations, and we will be leading organizations before long. So, start thinking about that now, just as a final advice.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my perception is it's almost
Mm,
split into three generations, which really was
mm,
accented with the COVID story and the forced
mm,
lockdowns, remote working, all the rest of it, which has kind of given rise to maybe the
mm,
more hybrid average that we're seeing now globally. So, it seems to me that the people who are in their 20s now,
mm,
graduates, getting towards late 20s, are kind of missing that
mm,
opportunity to be around people and observe from others in an office setting, the social
mm,
aspect, the water cooler idea generation. You then have maybe those who are
mm,
a bit more in the middle, like myself. I'd like to kind of probably put myself in there, who have been, commuting through traffic
mm,
jams and flying to different places, stuck in the metro, whatever. And know what it is like to think I don't want to do that 5 days a week, but there's still
mm,
that kind of interaction piece that's key. And then you have the later generation that probably in the autumn stages of their career that did that for 20 years. They don't really see the sense
mm.
or the logic necessarily to something remote. So again, maybe a big piece of the puzzle that AI can help us figure out is to find that
Definitely. And I
equilibrium.
would be very interested in working with a company that would want to use AI for sort of social interaction planning. I think that sounds
Mm.
like a brilliant way of using generative AI, is just trying to map out, well, how are we actually going to get our employees to interact with one another on a more in-person basis in a world where, people are working from home most of the time. I think that sounds like a really, really interesting
Yeah,
project.
I think so. And to kind of maybe
Mm,
ask you one
mm,
more question on that note, in
mm,
terms of looking forward, future trends and innovations, what do you believe are some emerging trends in generative AI that you believe will maybe transform further the hiring process?
mm,
And equally, how should companies stay
mm.
abreast of those developments to maintain a competitive
Ooh,
edge?
that's a good question, because the future is very uncertain. Uh, I try to keep sort of my outlook into the future less than 6 months, maybe even less than that for some use cases,
Mm.
because what happens beyond 6 months, it's like if I try to remember where we were 6 months ago in terms of AI development, and then I compare that to where we are today. It's just massive difference, and everything's moving so quickly. So in terms of specific trends, that's very difficult to say. But I do believe that there is one major trend that we're not too far off of being possible, but we still need some technological developments to happen, or to make it happen, and that would be the personal GPT, right? So imagine what you can do the day you have this AI agent, right? This little sidekick robot that just knows everything about you, including sort of, yeah,
Like a clone
like a
of yourself, an
digital,
AI
or
clone.
a digital
Yeah.
avatar that very closely matches you uh, on the personal level. That would be a game changer, because that means that not only can this AI agent, this little sidekick, not only can that just go out and apply for all kinds of jobs with you, if you have the correct infrastructure on your side, then you don't really need to do any sort of pre-screening, right? Then it's more about, well, the my machine, or the organization's GPT, and this person's GPT say that, well, these two are a match made in heaven. Let's have them in for an interview. And then that's a process that takes maybe a week, start to finish, from first interview until you're hired,
Mm.
depending on sort of how much automation you've done with the onboarding on the other side of sort of that activity. But I think that could be
Mm.
huge if something like that were to become available. There are some technical challenges. I did mention that, and the biggest one is actually memory. So getting these models to remember a lot of data about an individual is a key technical challenge.
Mm.
But there are many bright minds working on that issue.
It's a fascinating time. It really is the
Mm,
next industrial revolution in a
mm,
sense. It's a technological revolution, but and let's be honest, none of us should have any widespread panic. I was on a train going somewhere a few months back, and I saw a big billboard, and it said, "Okay, go ahead, AI, finish this building." It's all about, can it replace individual builders and construction workers? And well, probably not, but it can certainly help a lot in terms of calculations and design. And so I think it's a question of balance, but certainly in the kind of business that we're in, whether it's search or technology or consultancy, it's going to be a real exciting
if
ride,
I'm going to
for
be
sure.
perfectly honest, we're probably not too far off that being possible. Right now, we can see the contours of sort of humanoid robots doing work that we can already see that happening today, and there are companies out there working on sort of fixing that. But what it's going to take us a little bit of time to figure out is, well, how do we make them as efficient as humans at doing the same thing? And then that's, or when I say as efficient, we mean sum total, right? So if you have a robot that can work 24 hours a day, never needs rest, only needs its batteries charged every now and then, sort of, it's already very competitive with a human that can only work 8 hours. Right? So where does that sort of,
It's a game changer.
But I do foresee a future where robots can complete an entire building or design and build an entire building. I don't think we're too far off from that. But then again, sort of, if that's all you're fixated on, then it's very easy to sort of lose the plot. So I would recommend that sort of we stay where or not stay where we are, but we focus on where we are, right? So we focus on what's possible right now, and then we build solutions and frameworks around that, and drive adoption around that, essentially.
Yeah, yes. And evolution will take care of itself, as it has throughout history, right? So, well, Carl, look, it's been a fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed it. It was insightful. It was fascinating. So thank you for taking the time to come on and speak with me on this topic. If any of our viewers or listeners do have questions they'd like to pose to myself or Carl, you'll find our contact details in the episode description. And if you wanted to find a little bit more out about case studies or potential applications of the technology, again, feel free to shoot us a note. So, Carl, until the next time, thank you again for tuning in, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.